What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the EC Tech Coding channel, where today we're going to be discussing variables. So, what are variables? Whenever you think of variables, think of them as a container that stores value and we can manipulate that data. So, to put in a visual term, let's go ahead and look at this visual representation that I've prepared for us. We have a couple lockers here that all have a variable, or you can think of it as a name. We have locker A, locker B, locker C, and so on. And within those lockers, we've stored some type of value. For this example, I've stored numbers into them. So we have value 32 for the name A, value 3 for the name B, and so on. So as long as you keep in mind that it contains both a name and a value, you should be okay whenever it comes to variable. So let's take a look at some variables I've actually created already. So in line number 2, we can see I have created the variable named person's name. And inside of that, I've stored the value of John. If we go ahead and uncomment this one and run it, it should output the name John in the terminal. As we can see, it does output the name John. Now for the second one, I've declared a variable named age and I've given it the value 25. So if we do the same thing for this and uncomment it, it should give us the value of 25. So as you can see, it does output that value. Now, one of the things to consider whenever you create your variables is if you assign it in two different places, or you assign it, like let's say in line 12, and then you call it again, but give it a new number, it's going to change the value it currently has. So we go here, run in debug. On the left side, we'll take a look at what the values have currently. For X, we can see it currently contains the value 5, which is what we've assigned to it in line 12. If we output it, it's going to print the value 5. So let's go ahead and continue. This is the first X value, 5. Now, in line 18, we change that variable. And as we can see on the left side, X now has the value of 10. If we go ahead and continue, it's going to output the new value. And as we can see on the terminal, it now has the new value. We've reassigned the value of 10. Now, since we're talking about variables, we got to talk about the rules that come with variables. So one of the rules that comes with variables is that they must start with a letter or underscore. As we can see the two examples here, we have jar equals 23, underscore home equals 3. Both of those are valid names. And from that, it kind of just visually explains to you that that's the requirement. For line 9 and 10, I've made two errors here just to showcase you cannot put anything besides a letter or underscore for the beginning of it. If we uncomment both of them, we can see there's some type of error. For line number 9, it's got a special symbol at the beginning, which is not valid. Because of line number 3, rule number 1, it must start with a letter or underscore. For line number 10, again, this is not valid because it starts with a number. So let's go over rule number 2. Rule number 2 states that the remaining characters can be letters, numbers, or underscores. So as I've shown you in line number 14, line stop 01 equals 23 is valid. It contains letters, contains a capital letter, and it contains numbers inside of it. And that is okay since the first one starts with a letter. If it started with an underscore, it would also be fine. Now I have two invalid names here just to showcase. As we can see, for line 17, it contains spaces, which it is not allowed to contain any special characters in the middle of it. Same for line 18 is it contains another special character, the $sign between John and income. This is not valid. So whenever you're making your variable, remember those two rules. It's got to start with a letter or underscore, and then the remaining characters can be letters, numbers, or underscores. Now let's discuss rule number 3. Variables are case sensitive, meaning income and income are two different values in this case. So we take a look at income equals 23 and income with a capital I equals 54. They are not the same thing. The second or 22nd line does not overwrite the line on 21. It does not mess anything with income with a lowercase I. If we go in here and put some breakpoints, then click on run, start debugging, we can see there's two different variables, income with capital I with value 54 and income with a lowercase I with the value 23. So if you're ever creating your own variables, remember to keep the same structure. If there's uppercases in it, make sure you use the same one unless you want to create a new one. But if you want to create a different one, it would be better to rename it in an entirely different way, as it could confuse you whenever you're trying to go over it again. Now, rule number 4 is to use descriptive words instead of just a letter. And by this, it means, as you see on line 28, it just has the letter X. It has no meaning, it's just there. You can't really decipher what that's referring to or what it's being used for. Compared to line 29, where it has the variable remaining bottles equals 23. It has a meaning that if you were to ever come back in 3 months, you would look at it and understand what this code is being used for or what this variable is being used for. And it's more to help you out and anyone else that uses your coding. By putting words that have meaning into them, it helps you, it pretty much just helps out in the end of the day. Now let's discuss rule number 5, and that is to always start with a lowercase unless it is user defined. We're not going to go over user defined just yet, but just keep in mind most of the time we're going to start beginning our variables with lower cases, and then after that, any additional word, we're going to uppercase that first letter and then continue with lower cases. If there's, like, let's say in this case, 3 words, box, of, and tissue, we start with the lowercase, uppercase the first letter in of, and then uppercase the first letter in T, just so it's easily readable. All right, now let's talk a little bit about integers and float. So what is an integer? Whenever you think of an integer, think of a whole number. In this case, we have age equals 24, bottles equals 6, cars equals 3. All of these variables contain integers, a whole number. As we can see in line 7, 8, and 9, those contain decimals after the first number. So those are called float. Anything that contains a decimal is considered a float most of the time. But in our cases, that's what we're going to be using is integers and floats. All right, now let's talk about constant variables. So what are constant variables? Constant variables are variables that usually do not change. We try and keep them in only one place where it is altered if we ever have to come back and change it for some unknown reason. One example is state taxes. Most of the time, they do not change from what I've seen. There's also just sales tax, stuff like that. By keeping it constant in one place and changing it there, whenever we use it in other places of the code, there's only one place we have to come back and change that number. Another thing to do or to take in consideration when creating constant variables is if you can add underscores between different words. And the reason for this is it makes it easily readable. If you ever have to look over someone else's code and you notice capital letters, that means that variable is a constant. Constant variables are always going to be capitalized, every single letter. That's what helps identify it. The downside to Python is it does not have a special feature where you can simply put something such as const and then make it a constant, kind of preventing you from altering any of the information. You have to make sure that you don't change any constants yourself, as it could affect your code later on. Now let's discuss comments. So comments are there for the reader. or you, the coder, so you can understand what the creator was making. By adding comments, if you ever come back to your code and look at it, you can convey what you were trying to do in that code or what that code was used for. Now, there's two different ways you can use comments. The first one is single line comments. By simply adding a pound sign at the beginning of wherever you want to start the comment, everything afterwards is considered a comment. The second way is by using multi-line comments, and everything in between the three double quotes is considered a comment. The thing about the three double quotes is you have to have it both at the beginning and at the end. Now let's talk about trying to avoid magic numbers. So what does it mean by magic numbers? Magic numbers are whenever you see a number in your code or calculations that's just there. It has no meaning, it has no comments above it, it's just appeared out of nowhere. You as the coder might know what it's used for, but let's say again, you leave a couple months, years, whatever, come back to your code and you look at this number, you're trying to figure out what it's used for, what its intention is, and so on. By looking at code 6 to 9 and line 11 to 15, we can compare the two. One of them contains pi, one of them does not. Instead, it just contains a number representing pi, 3.1415. If you put a name constant approach, such as in line 12, we put pi equals 3.1415. If we ever come back, we know what that number represents. There's no confusion. It's easily readable. Compared to line 8, where it just contains the number, if we ever hand this code to someone else or we just come back, we could have trouble trying to figure out exactly what this code is pointing to. And that pretty much wraps up this video about variables. Hopefully you learned a couple things or remembered just by watching this video. And a special thank you, I kind of want to give you some, I would call it kind of homework, but it's not really homework as it has the solutions up here. It's pretty much just some practice Python coding. It tells you to do some stuff in there. There's two different ways you can, I guess, copy it to your coding environment. One way is to simply copy it, Control-C it, and then put it in your code. Or the second way is to go ahead and download the raw file, which it will download to your, wherever your downloads go. You head in the downloads folder, and you can simply launch it with whatever program you usually use to run Python files. In this case, I use Visual Studio Code, so I would right click it, click on Visual Studio Code, and then it opens up. So I really hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it helped you learn some of the stuff whenever it comes to variables and whatnot. And next time I'm going to be discussing, I think it was arithmetic and then strings. Those are the two topics we're going to cover in the next video, and then the one after that is going to be strings. So not strings in the next one. That's the one afterwards. But anyways, thank you for watching, and I hope you have a good day. See you.